Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Daily Objective. And boy, do we have a topic for you today. Donald Rumsfeld. Rest in peace. Guys named Donald, let me tell you, they've been nothing but great for this country. I'm obviously waxing poetic here, but let's get into this. I'm a little bit too young to know that much about the decades in which Rumsfeld was very relevant. I think he worked for Gerald Ford in Gerald Ford's presidency. Obviously long before I personally was born. But then during my high school years, my teen years, the Iraq War was waging, and Rumsfeld had a prominent position in the Defense Department or Secretary of Defense, whatever. Yeah, I think that was his title. You would think I would have it ready to go. But I think whether or not I know that much about him in particular, I have a lot to say about foreign policy that this raises, as does my co-host. So let's meet him. This is a guy who you know from Dexter, Supernatural, Lost, and best of all, Fleabag versus Atlas Shrugged, premiering tomorrow on the Ayn Rand Center UK. I am excited. I'm actually watching Fleabag currently. I'm binging. It's a short season, short episodes. It's a really funny stuff. I'm looking forward to hearing the discussion. So make sure everybody subscribe to Ayn Rand Center UK with notifications and watch that tomorrow. The time of it coming momentarily. But let's meet him, Mark Pellegrino. Welcome to the show.
Hey, what's up? Yeah, I think everybody should watch Fleabag just so they can check against our thoughts on it and give us some lively counters and discussion.
Yeah.
Well, you're not the only one who was too young for Donald Rumsfeld. I mean, the guy had a career that spanned over 50 years in quote unquote public service. He started in the Nixon administration, so. He as a congressman before that, as from what I understand, and so and I was a young man. The Vietnam War was the war that I was brought up in, and was a young man during his early service. So I don't remember too much about that. I can say I think I'm saying this accurately that there's a lot of people that have been hate tweeting Donald Rumsfeld, and for some very good reasons, I imagine, but. Let's not forget that he also co-authored the Freedom of Information Act and also was instrumental in eliminating the draft, which to me is quite a noble thing to do, and perhaps in contradiction to some of his policies later on. But he saved American men's lives simply by making the draft a non-issue in America and creating an all-voluntary force. So for those things, he should be certainly praised for making the government transparent and saving American men from the horrors of going overseas to fight in wars that they don't agree with.
Absolutely. The horrors of going overseas, or just the time that they're forced to give up, the effort, the time of the years they're forced to give to the government, give to the state. So anyone who played a part in eliminating the draft deserves a thumbs up and some moral credit. All of that being said, what I do know about Rumsfeld affiliation and influence on America in the 2000s, the sort of post 9/11 decade that came, it was a very, very, very horrific time. I mean, if we think it's difficult today to kind of differentiate lovers of liberty from the Republican Party, imagine trying to do that during the sort of waging of war, because on one hand, we've got the anti-war crowd that they're just complete pacifists. They're just like, no, everything's America's fault. If America does anything overseas and anyone tries to kill us, it must be our fault. On the other hand, there's this George Bush sort of Christian neoconservative approach, which is saying, go liberate the world, liberate them of their dictatorships, and they will magically understand what rule of law means, what liberty means, what it requires, and they will become our greatest friends. So then when you have actual lovers of liberty, people that understand liberty needs to be defended, sometimes defended with force, we're not for the neoconservative spreading of democracy, but we're also not pacifists. And interestingly, it was during those years of George W. Bush and Donald Rumsfeld's tenure that the internet became what it became. The internet became a place where anyone can get online and give their opinion to a mass audience. And of course, the objectivists got on the internet. You started to see people like Yaron Brook and Leonard Peikoff get on the internet. And Leonard Peikoff's speech, America versus Americans, would talk about how pacifistic and altruistic America's foreign policy is, as opposed to the usual criticism, which is to say that it's hawkish and bloodthirsty and all that. So it's very frustrating to explain to people, we are for self-defense, but that's not what George Bush was actually doing. It's frustrating, ain't it?
Indeed. And to say something, again, Rumsfeld defense, I'm not a fan, I want to say at the outset, but he also seemed to envision a more technologically based army where fewer service personnel had to be on the ground. And I remember that being, if I'm not remembering this correctly, somebody in the audience can correct me, but I seem to remember the media who were whipping up panic left and right when we were in that region, was quite frightened of the fact that we were facing, what is it, the fourth largest army in the world, or somewhere in that neighborhood, with a force of about 1/5 of what we were supposed to, quote unquote, go in there with, and we ended up defeating them in, what was it, 13 days? I forget the exact number, but we heard at every stage of the invasion that the men were doing it wrong. The poison gas was about to be unleashed. Armageddon was going to happen. Parts of the army were moving ahead of other parts, and they were going to be surrounded and cut off soon because they had so few troop numbers. And I think Rumsfeld was more right than his critics in that respect. What we needed was technology, and we didn't have to have the enormous personnel to defeat one of the biggest armies in the world.
Yes, and the anti-war crowd, they hold that technology as a point against America. Like drone strikes, the drones came about, I think under Bush, and then Obama definitely used a lot of drones. And people say, oh, these drone strikes are out there killing the innocent. Well, I don't want to send American 18-year-olds by foot into enemy territories to try and track down the particular suspect. If you can kill Osama bin Laden along with an entire village and spare the lives of Americans, then I would say that is the proper way to conduct war.
And by the way, one of Rumsfeld's critics on Slate did a scathing obituary of him, critiqued this aspect of Rumsfeld's career, that he was envisioning a smaller army, technologically adept, and claimed that it was that reason, the fact that we had so little personnel actually on the ground in Iraq, that we, quote unquote, couldn't contain it. We couldn't hold it. So the critics are clearly, I don't think any objectivist would say that. I don't think we would say that the reason we didn't hold Iraq is because we didn't have enough people to do it. No, we just didn't have the will. We didn't have the political will and the ethical strength, the moral strength to do it. Had we had the political will and the moral strength, I think we could have held that defeat pretty easily.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's a guy I now dislike, but I used to read a little bit, a guy named Mark Stein. So who I am today, I think he's way too preoccupied with demographics, with immigration. Not my cup of tea, but he did once describe in one of his books how he visited Iraq in the weeks after the invasion, or the month, like early on after America, accomplished the mission of toppling Saddam's regime. And Mark Stein describes how when an American would walk around, nobody wanted any trouble. They almost like didn't even want to give him the bill at a cafe after he ordered. Like they thought Americans are as brutal and ruthless as they are, as Saddam and the Iraqi culture sort of was. So, and is probably. So they thought when America came in, they thought, okay, don't mess with America. Do whatever America says. Americans are here. They're in charge. But as time passed and they saw George Bush go over there, tell them how wonderful their culture is, and basically apologize for America being stronger than they are. Over time, the Iraqis and the sort of terrorist groups they imported, Al-Qaeda, etc., they kind of realized, oh, America is a paper tiger. I mean, they've got the strength, but they don't use it. They don't think they're worthy of it. They're basically here to apologize to us. They're here to tell us, create the government that you want. And that's when the war escalated and Americans started being targeted and killed. So it really is how the psychological message you send somebody in war. But to the anti-war people, they think it was always doomed to be a blunder. It was always supposed to be that way. But no, if America had the right mentality going into that war, whether or not America should have gone to Iraq is one question. But once America goes in, if America would have had the right mentality about it and treated the enemy like, you don't want to mess with us, it could have had much smoother sailing.
I think Rumsfeld was asked at one point while he was Secretary of Defense what lessons he learned from Vietnam, because of course he was a congressman during that and saw every stage of the Vietnam War while holding political office of one kind or another. And his response, I think, is very typical of the pragmatist that he probably was. His response was something like, well, you learn that some things work and some things don't. And I think that is what he applied to the Middle East problem. Of course, I think we as objectivists agree with Leonard Peikoff that Iraq was not the proper war to fight. It was Iran that we should go after, and probably still should in some respects. Iraq was a distraction in many ways, unfortunately, and a bloody distraction. And that's where I think the left is right. The war was not the proper war to fight, if there is such a thing, and we believe there is. And 200,000 Iraqis lost their lives in that exchange, and 4,000 Americans. For what? For what?
For what? Right. What do we have to show for it? And yeah, so definitely I would recommend to people look up Leonard Peikoff's America versus Americans lecture, anything by Yaron Brook from the 2000s about the Middle East and Islam or anything like that, Iraq. And I think they describe how the decision to go into Iraq, why Iraq, why not Iran? Well, Iraq was not really the one who hit us on 9/11. So to respond to the actual countries responsible for 9/11, such as Iran and Saudi Arabia, who have much clearer links to 9/11, isn't that selfish? I mean, isn't that too assertive and self-interested? So a Christian evangelical like George W. Bush, if he has to go into the Middle East, he'd rather go into Iraq for the reason that they are not really the direct ones responsible for hitting us. Also, Iraq is more of a secular dictatorship, and the Christian George W. Bush doesn't want to ever admit that religious people, that lovers of God, could ever do something like 9/11. So, okay, we'll go into Iraq, and maybe that'll send a message to Iran and the others that it's time to relax. So it is altruism at play, and it's just war theory at play when these rules of engagement are so pathetic and pragmatist. There's a lot of examples of this in the book Winning the Unwinnable War, which I'll recommend to people. I read it. It's very illuminating just how philosophy affects everything people do. Altruism and Christian influence in America's foreign policy. It is anything but hawkish. It is pathetic and apologetic, and it accomplishes nothing. It does not defend liberty, and it does not spread liberty. It absolutely just makes the world a worse place ultimately.
Well, it spreads democracy, doesn't it? It spreads democracy and enables the people to elect the next tyrant. But that's about it.
Yeah, and Americans have been and still are in the Middle East bribing one group of Islamists to fight another. Like that's absolute. I mean, you want to talk about pragmatism? That's it. Short range. Okay, we need to defeat this group here, so we'll bribe these other equally evil people to fight them. It makes America look weak and corrupt, and it obviously just emboldens the bad guys. I mean, it's been said that ISIS was basically the creation of America. And I mean, usually people say that they want to make us look like we're as bad as ISIS, but the sort of kernel of truth in that is, I think during the Syrian rebellion, Americans were basically funding the rebels. Guys like John McCain, yeah, fund the rebels. You know, let's get this evil al-Assad out of power. So he's funding the rebels. Who did the rebels turn out to be? And who took over the elements of the rebels? Like the more Islamist elements, of course, took over. They've got the moral certainty. They've got the consistency. And that's what you see over and over again. So when you have the apologetic, pragmatist, unprincipled Americans, trying to align themselves with the moderates in the Middle East, and then you have ISIS, the zealous, principled religious lunatics fighting as well. I mean, who are people going to side with? Who are people going to be more inspired to join over there? It all ultimately leads to an enormous disaster. And the sort of predictions that going to the Middle East would be a blunder, a quagmire, as Dick Cheney once put it, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But it's because of the pragmatism, it's because of the altruism in the foreign policy that it becomes such a quagmire. The America of yesteryear, the America of, of the Civil War, of the Revolutionary War, the America that was ready to fight and win decisively, that America would have no problem taming the threat coming from the Islamic world.
Indeed.
Yeah, ain't it the truth? All right. One of the oh yeah, by the way, so when you were on Michael Malice's podcast, this came up. I think he asked you about foreign policy vis-a-vis objectivism, and you basically gave your spiel. You said, you don't F with us. You F with us, we'll F with you. And it's not going to be tit for tat, like you knock down one of our buildings, we'll knock down one of yours. No, we will be disproportionate. Like we will respond. And
that's correct. Your responsibility to yourself and to your country, if you're a politician, is to defend the lives of the innocent. What does that mean? That means taking the fight to the bad guys until they cannot resist any longer. And they surrender on your terms or get wiped out. That's actually the moral way to fight.
Yeah.
It's immoral to give them a quarter. It's immoral to let them give up on their terms and to not completely and utterly repudiate their values in the eyes of the world.
Yeah, and the Islamists in the Middle East and elsewhere, they refer to America as the great Satan and Israel as the little Satan. And Israel really is a smaller version of America in this respect. Israel is accused of being disproportionate in their responses to Hamas. They should openly say, we will be disproportionate. You fire a missile at us, we will intentionally be disproportionate in our response.
Well, I'm sorry, but firing 4,000 missiles and having one ceiling knocker bomb hit a building, in response is not disproportionate.
Right. They mean the casualties are disproportionate.
If Hamas, well, it's because Hamas is so goddamn incompetent, and they're largely doing it for publicity's sake, because the rest of the world is so naive and so influenced by that altruist ethic that the weak and the meek and the poor are somehow the moral authorities in this situation, irrespective of the context.
So I agree. When people accuse Israel of being disproportionate, they're lying. But even if Israel were being disproportionate, if Israel were responding to acts of aggression with 10 times as much aggression, that would not necessarily be the wrong thing. It's a question of tactics. What is the best way to stop this threat immediately, to win this war decisively, so we can all get back to peace and prosperity? So Israel should be clear, just as every free country should be. You attack us, our response will be disproportionate. And
what do you do? What do you do with the civilians who overwhelmingly support Hamas? Aid and abet and morally support such an evil organization. If you're going to wipe out Hamas, it's not going to be a pretty thing.
You need to crush the spirits of the region. So there is no support for Hamas. People are inspired to support Hamas because, again, they see a pragmatist, apologetic Israel on one hand, and then they see Hamas with moral fervor and zealotry. Who are they going to be inspired to fight with? So it's all a question of it's a question of tactics. War is not a new concept. Wars have been waged and won for centuries. I know there's a book called Nothing Less Than Victory by an objectivist, Mr. Lewis, I forget his name, John Lewis, I think.
Yeah. The Greek historian.
There is a way to win war. The reason free countries don't fight to win anymore is because of altruism, because of pragmatism, because of a lot of things that are not rational egoism. And why I brought up your conversation with Malice is because I noticed he was not really pushing back against you when you said that. He seemed kind of taken aback. And I've noticed the same. People, when you actually present them like a rational foreign policy, saying we need to be very clear with enemies who attack us and our way of life, that our response will be direct, swift, and aggressive. people, they tend to respond positively to that, such as like right after 9/11, when Bush was talking tough, people, they were willing to go with him and see and kind of see and watch him follow through with that. So
yes, I think that, you're right. I think the maxim is we won't start it, but we'll finish it.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, altruism and pragmatism in foreign policy kills a lot of people, and it certainly draws a moral equivalency between good and evil, between Islamist fundamentalists versus Jeffersonian Democrats, and that's something that needs to change. So philosophy is everything, folks. You better recognize it. All right. We were one of the topics on the table for the episode today was Bill Cosby. Now, I think both of us did not follow closely the court case, which is a reason I did not want to make it the topic of today's episode, because as easy as it is to kind of say, well, Bill Cosby's guilty and he can go to hell, I don't really know the details surrounding his experiences with these accusers, or the particular accuser he was convicted of raping. So I try to be prudent, especially when it comes to court cases and stuff like that. It's not always as open shut as it seems. Do you have any thoughts about Bill Cosby and his recent release? You can plead the fifth.
No comment. No comment at the moment. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. It's anyway, but it is obviously very controversial. He's suddenly released. It obviously brings out a lot of opinions. Some people saying, look, the innocent, like, we live in a rape culture. Other people saying, look, this proves that blacks are not oppressed. I tend to say court cases are very sensitive. You want to be very careful when looking at a court case, and it's very difficult to be objective about a court case when there's so much PR surrounding it, so much media hype around it. But anyway, maybe to be continued another day, or with this case or another like it. Anyway, great episode. Hope we have inspired people to look up Leonard Peikoff and Yaron Brooks lectures on the Middle East from about 10, 15 years ago. I hope we've inspired people to read Winning the Unwinnable War by Ilan Giorno. It's also got essays by Yaron Brook and Alex Epstein. Now, there's a guy who, look, whenever I see what he's up to, I'm like, what am I like dealing with? Some guy in the chat room over here is running their mouth at me. This guy is going up against Congress. He's talking to the most powerful people in the world. He's not stuttering.
Well,
he's not hesitating.
The beauty of it is he's exposing them for the mental midgets that they are. I pretty much think anybody in a chat in this space right here has more going on mentally than pretty much every congressman he's engaged with.
Very true, but it still takes courage to look at these people and tell it like it is. I'm afraid to imagine myself in such a situation. So fighting the good fight. Subscribe to Center for Industrial Progress, folks, and watch it with your own eyes. Thank you, Christopher Smith, for the $1.49 Canadian. That probably is about $1 American. And with that being said, I suppose we can jump over to Clubhouse. Remember, everybody, tomorrow at 10 p.m. UK time, which is 5 Eastern on Friday, Mark Pellegrino is going to be talking to Jax and to Jennifer about Atlas Shrugged, comparing it to Fleabag, which is a really funny show. And I suppose these discussions are kind of leaning towards envisioning what the Atlas Shrugged inspired series is going to sort of look like. Is that kind of the idea, or am I?
I think it'll have elements of that to it. We're going to experiment with the shows and see exactly where it's going to go. We have an idea for a format, but you don't know how it's going to go until it goes. So.
Fair enough. In any case, this is going to be interesting to watch. So I'm looking forward. Remember, everybody, check out the show Fleabag so you can enjoy the discussion tomorrow. All right. Well, thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for watching. And we'll be on Clubhouse momentarily. See ya and goodbye.